Hello and welcome back to PredictIt live only on Old Bull TV, your exclusive source for real-time coverage of the stock market for politics. Pratik Chougule from Star Spangled Banners is with us again today. We are breaking down the new market action on how many members of Congress will vote for the January 6th commission tomorrow. We got a couple more picks for you, plus we are taking your questions live, so let's get to it. Well, welcome back, political traders. I am your host, Flip Pidot, and for the second day in a row, the PredictIt gods have favored us with some super fast action markets. Yesterday, of course, we got the Pennsylvania ballot amendment market, the vote for which is actually happening as we speak. And for the record, I still think this one is a screaming bargain at around 75 cents at last check. And you still got a few hours left to get in on that one. Check out yesterday's episode for somewhat more in-depth analysis, as well as on our Twitter feed at Old Bull TV. Been continuing to look into sort of the history of Pennsylvania ballot measures a bit further this morning on Twitter. And today, there are actually a few new markets on PredictIt. We've got a primary for New York City Comptroller, the number of confirmation votes for Kirsten Clark as Assistant Attorney General, the vote for the Capitol Security Bill, I believe, and the one that we are focusing on, and many of you have been asking for, which is the outcome of tomorrow's House vote to establish a national commission to investigate the January 6th Capitol attack. So before we get to the nuts and bolts of that whip count, remember, if you are a new trader, we do offer a promo code that'll get you started with up to $25 in free cash, real cash in your trading account. You just go to predictit.org/promo/oldbull25 for that $25 deposit match. Viewers, if you have a question for either Pratik or me, ask away in the chat window. We'll get to as many questions as we can, time allowing. And please also take this opportunity to subscribe to the channel. There's buttons right down there, and it couldn't be easier. You can also tick that little bell icon after you subscribe. That way you will get notified whenever we go live. And while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and bring in today's panel. It's a panel of one, our go-to Beltway handicapper. It's Pratik Chougule from Star Spangled Gamblers. Excuse me. Pratik, how are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, what do you think about all these ultra short-term expiration markets that PredictIt's been putting up? It makes for pretty interesting political offseason.
Yeah, definitely. I tend not to be a specialist in these markets, so unfortunately, I won't have too much to offer. I would say when it comes to markets related to vote counts, the person who I trust the most is Brett Cannon. So I would definitely check him out on Twitter.
You happen to know his Twitter handle? We'll go ahead and give him the plug here on air if you.
I believe it's just at Brett Cannon, but I can maybe in the show notes after we can confirm.
Sure. We'll pop it up as a comment maybe. In any event, let's get to this market again. This is basically how many yes votes there will be in the House vote scheduled for tomorrow. And this establishment of the National Commission to investigate the January 6th Capitol attack, insurrection, domestic terror attack, whatever you want to call it. And this one's of significant interest, and I mentioned a lot of you have actually been asking for it. So PredictIt was good enough to accommodate. But what the interesting dynamic here, if you haven't been following it, is this is supposed to be a bipartisan commission. Each party puts, I think, 5 people on it, with the Democrats appointing the chair, the Republicans appointing the vice chair. And it was worked out, the details and parameters were worked out by the leadership of the House Homeland Security Committee. So it's John Katko on the Republican side, and his name is escaping me. Benny Thompson, the chair of the committee that sort of worked out all the nuts and bolts of this. Kevin McCarthy, though, House Minority Leader, came out today saying he was not going to support it. In fact, he opposes it. He had previously said, well, he wanted to see what all the details were in the final kind of rhetorical language. But today he has announced he is opposing it. So interestingly, though, the Republicans are not whipping against it, or at least Steve Scalise, the Minority Whip's spokesperson, said they're not, actively encouraging or discouraging people to vote one way or another on this. So, of course, the thing that we trading on this need to figure out is, what's the actual whip count going to be? How many people are going to vote for this? And you can see the brackets here are pretty narrow. They're just 3 wide. So, for instance, 227 to 229, you don't have too much margin for error. So you really got to, if you're going to play one of these interior brackets rather than one of the endpoints, you really got to either lay down a few markers or do your own whip counting quite precisely. So, but the basic math to keep in mind here is you got 219 Democrats, and presumably all or virtually all of them will vote yes. Exceptions might be any who are absent or otherwise unable to vote. And recently there have been 2 members of the Democratic caucus who have been missing consistently votes in recent days, including one, Jared Golden, whose wife just had a baby. I don't know if this will bring him back to Washington. I believe he represents Maine, so he may be well out of the region. But so you may be starting from a base of about, let's say, 217 Democrat votes, and you can see the first bracket here, the bottom bracket is 220 or fewer. So this bracket is basically straight party line vote or something very close to it. Small single-digit number of Republicans would tip this out of the bottom bracket. Again, in brackets that are 3 wide, this then goes up to a top bracket of 245 or more. I want to bring up very quickly a Twitter poll that we ran on this question earlier today, just to get a sense of at least those following us on Twitter, where you all feel it was going to tomorrow's vote is likely to come out. These brackets are obviously slightly different from what PredictIt wound up with, but you tend to think it's going to be fairly close to the bottom end of that range, with a plurality supporting 229 or fewer back on the market. That would equate to sort of the bottom 4 brackets, and we have a couple of other proxy votes that we can look to get a sense of how much of the Republican caucus might actually throw in with this. I mean, you've got 16 members on the 16 Republican members of the House Homeland Security Committee, whose leader, ranking member Katko, negotiated this. I don't know that they've staked out formal positions in support or in opposition, but presumably some of them might be swayable. Other numbers to keep in mind, you had 10 Republican members of the House that voted to impeach. You had, I think, 58 or 59 that voted either against Elise Stefanik or didn't vote. So, that may be your overall kind of range, would be kind of upper 220s to, at the extreme high end, maybe something like 270, 280, which would put a midpoint right around kind of 250. In this range of predicted brackets, that would put you in the top bracket. If you came to around 250, that would be with a few dozen Republicans basically voting for it. And as you can see, the pricing on this is still settling out. It's common experience. If those of you that have been watching the show, we look at these markets usually right after they've gone live, so they're not very liquid. So it's tough to get consistent pricing, but it's also oftentimes a really good opportunity to get in there and kind of plant your flag, establish your position before the market has sort of figured out its directionality. I think these brackets are actually a little low. I think they're pretty narrow, but if you're going to have 220 as the bottom bracket, I think there could have been an argument to make them a little wider, to make the top band accommodate the possibility that a more than negligible number of Republicans will wind up coming out in support. Now, McCarthy opposing it obviously is going to sway a number of them against it. But before McCarthy was opposed to it, you could see a way where this could truly become a relatively bipartisan commission with bipartisan support in the House. So, if the pricing here, the bid-ask spreads are to be believed, this, you've got a print already in the top bracket at 30 cents, but the spread is basically between 26 and 31. For me, I think that is probably my favorite bracket, at least at these prices. I would have a hard time trying to pin it down to a single bracket, a 3-wide bracket. Were I to have to, I would probably pick the second or third to top bracket, that 239 to 241 or 242 to 244. But I think there's just a good chance that there's a decent groundswell of support here. Again, you don't have Scalise's office whipping against it. You've had a couple of proxy votes already where at the bare minimum, kind of the most nuclear way for House Republicans to vote was on the actual impeachment. And even there, you got 10. Just 10 alone plus 217 Democrats, assuming they have 2 absent, would put you at 227, which is already the 4th bracket from the bottom. So I think to the extent that, especially, as I said, in the early goings when the market hasn't really figured out its consensus yet, there's going to be a tendency to kind of gravitate towards the middle, to see these brackets as sort of optimally tuned, and you expect sort of a nice bell curve distribution throughout it. But I think that's a little misleading. I think the true center of gravity here, in terms of where the probabilistic expected value of this would be much closer to the top end of these brackets, possibly even in the top brackets. Not to say that the 245 or more bracket has a fair value at this point of over 50. In other words, not being more likely than not to happen. But I think at 30, it's pretty attractive. Again, just because this is fairly opaque in terms of how people are gonna come out. These Republican members were by and large in the chamber or in their offices during the attack. They obviously have visceral recollection of what happened here. There's not too much incendiary in the language in the bill, so far as I could see, that would turn them off. And again, it doesn't really take that many to get you from 217 to 245 or more. You only need 28 Republicans. So it's roughly 10% of the caucus. To me, this is a nice, good risk-adjusted return, possibly triple up your money in the span of one day, 24 hours, thereabouts, depending on the exact timing of the vote. So that's where I'm going to come out as saying that this is certainly more of a gamble. But if you can get into that top bracket at 30 cents, that's certainly where I would be looking to put my positioning. I mentioned also, to throw it over to Pratik just as a sanity check, but one additional quirk that gives me a little bit of pause on this, and I mentioned that there don't seem to be too many rhetorical traps in the language of the bill. There is, though, a passage that seemed slightly gratuitous, not to say it's inaccurate, but the exact language, and I apologize, I'm looking it up here as I speak. In the purposes section, I'm just going to quote a bit from the text of the bill. It says, to investigate and report upon the facts and causes relating to the January 6th, 2021 domestic terror attack upon the United States Capitol complex, and then parenthetically, hereafter referred to as the domestic terrorist attack on the Capitol, close quotes. Again, I'm not making an argument about the factual accuracy of that characterization, only to say it seems that like a little bit of bait being dangled, sort of daring Republicans to oppose it on those grounds, whether that's the legislative or rhetorical intent or not. You can see it possibly giving pause to a Republican thinking, well, if I go back to my district, are people going to say that my voting for this calls this or the broader, January 6th protests or general, Trump support or whatever larger concentric circles you might want to wrap around opposition to this bill. Do certain, red state representatives start to worry that they're sort of endorsing the more, arguably editorial nature of some of the language in the bill? But that, again, that's more of a caveat to sort of my broader sense that the language in this does by and large come off as pretty anodyne, and likely is the result of the fact that Katko and Thompson negotiated this deal. And again, until McCarthy came out against it, it seemed like something that at least a number of Republicans would be able to get on board with. But that's sort of how I'm looking at this very short-term market. Again, I'm just refreshing now to see the pricing. We're still at 31 cents. The bid-ask is actually pretty narrow now, at between 30 and 32. I'm just going to check the order book too. I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the screen, but just to see how deep this is, how much you can get. So you can only get 5 shares at 32 cents, and then you push the price straight up to 45. So I would try and sort of leg into this slowly. I wouldn't throw a huge market order out there and push the price way up. But if you can get in around this price, I think, again, it's a pretty nice risk-adjusted return. With that, Pratik, it's my long-winded, somewhat rambling analysis of this, but and I know you're not really focusing on this as much today, but is this sort of overall sense resonate with you in terms of finding that many Republicans that would be willing to throw in behind this? I think I'd say 27, 28 Republicans to get to that top bracket.
Yeah, no, that was a really terrific overview, and I'm inclined to agree with you. I mean, I think at a very minimum, I think given the short-term nature of this market, even if you're not typically in the business of buying things in the mid 90s, in those lower brackets, it's not a bad deal for a one-day return. And I'm inclined to agree with you that I think let's see how the price settle out, but the upper brackets may end up being underpriced. And I mean, there are a few reasons that come to mind in addition to what you said. I think one, normally when you have the minority leader coming out against the bill, that really matters. But I think here there may be something of a gap between the incentives that McCarthy individually has and those of his broader caucus. The obvious being that it would be McCarthy himself who would have to come up and testify and provide a damning, embarrassing account just by virtue of the fact that he was the one talking to Trump. He's the one who, under oath, would probably have to say incriminating things about the president that he doesn't want to. I also think, too, that the momentum may be in favor of more Republicans signing on in light of what we have been seeing, especially yesterday, the day before, in the Arizona recount situation, where you are seeing more and more Republicans openly saying that this has to end, that the vote was not rigged. And you even saw, as one barometer of that, Lindsey Graham finally coming out and acknowledging that he accepts the outcome of the election. A final note I'll say here is that I'm very interested in how this vote comes out, because I have long suspected, maybe you can ask one of a professional pollster if my intuition here is correct, but I've long suspected that respectable mainstream pollsters often don't ask questions that actually are highly of interest and relevant, but just because it's too embarrassing. And to me, one question that I love to see polling on is what percentage of registered or self-identified Republican voters actually proactively support or think the insurrection against the Capitol was a good thing, that it is justified, that something like that. And my hunch here is that actually an alarming percentage of Republicans probably actually outright sympathize with the attack. And I suspect that Republican members of Congress kind of know this from the feedback they get with their office and their constituencies. So I think for the sake of the market here, the way PredictIt made the brackets, I think the upper brackets may end up being where it lands. But I would not be surprised if the overall number of Republicans coming out against it remains pretty high.
That's well put, and I completely agree too, and that's why. But a high number of Republicans being against it could still be 70%, 80%. You'd still be in the top bracket, right? Again, you only need about 10% of Republicans coming, voting in favor of this to get you to that 245. So again, I kind of think of this spectrum of proxy votes, right, from sort of impeachment on the one end, when you got 10 Republicans, to maybe this Stefanik vote, much more recent, but also less radioactive, requiring less fealty to Trump to vote that way. Again, where you had about 60. So if that's kind of the spectrum of swayable Republicans for things like this, that are kind of Trump aftermath proxy votes, sort of where does this one land? And how defensible will it be to Republicans in particularly red districts that may have folks sympathetic to at least elements of the protests, as you mentioned. So to me, it seems closer to that upper end of the spectrum in terms of being defensible. That okay, I have a red district, I have Trump supporters in my district, but are they really going to hold it against me that I agreed to this establishment of this commission? In some cases, yes. And that goes to, I think, your accurate expectation that a large number of Republicans vote against this. But I can't see it. I shouldn't say I can't see it. I'd be surprised if it's more than 90%. And if we don't wind up sort of closer to the Stefanik end of the spectrum, the Stefanik vote end of the spectrum versus the impeachment end, which again is why I do like that top bracket here around 30 cents. And the other point you brought up, Pratik, though, the other way to play this too, which is sort of the lower return but safer, way would be to simply bet against some of the bottom brackets. Now, the one you need to watch out for potentially is the 220 or fewer, because that typically, and I'm just pulling up the rules here, that typically has certain catch-alls. If there is no vote, then that bottom bracket resolves as yes. This one goes until May 21st. So you've got 3 days. So if this gets held up by amendments or any other unforeseen circumstances that push it way out, 220 or lower could resolve as yes, in kind of a surprise way, and that could be a real trap to buy 220 or fewer, to bet against it at this point 98 cents. But you can get a couple of these other brackets here, B2, B3 for 99 for B2, 96 for B3. So if you want, a 4% return in 24 hours, that seems like a fairly safe way to play it. But again, I'm pretty intrigued by this awfully low pricing on the top bracket, and I think that's where I would be putting my money for a potential 24-hour tripling of your money. With that, let's leave this vote alone for now. And Pratik, I want to get to the market that you selected for your pick today. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so there was some movement in a market I've been following for a long time now, which is the market on OMB Director, and where the front runner is Hyundai. I've been somewhat perplexed by the way traders have been reacting to this market for sort of the duration of it. Just to give kind of the brief background, I mean, originally President Biden nominated Neera Tanden to be OMB director, and that turned out to be a controversial pick on account of Tanden basically tweeting nasty things about senators and whatever. So eventually the Senate would not confirm her. She ended up withdrawing. And Shalanda Young had been nominated as deputy OMB director at the time that Tanden was up for the head job. And then when the Tanden nomination fell through, Shalanda got confirmed as deputy OMB director, and then now as acting OMB director. I have sort of believed from the outset that right from the time Tanden's nomination fell through, that Shalanda was pretty obviously the favorite to be not only be the acting, but ultimately just step in to be the Senate confirmed OMB director. And that basically has to do, my rationale here is there are a number of things. First is very credentialed and established for this position. She has been working on budget issues in Congress for a long time and has a high degree of trust and support across the aisle. I also think that given that she's now been in this role from the beginning, she seems to be doing a fine job in the position. There are no problems. Given how backed up the Biden administration is in getting their nominations through the Senate, it doesn't seem to be that this is the one where they really need to create additional headaches by trying to bring someone new in. Now, I think the reason the markets have been skeptical of Shalanda, the primary one has been that you've just seen over and over again different rivals coming up and falling. So if you look at the markets on Nani Coloretti, for example, and a number of others, they went up quite high before coming back down to earth. And I think there's been a great deal of suspicion that basically Biden may be under some pressure to nominate someone Asian, perhaps, in the role or whatever. And so you've just had this kind of pattern where the markets have been around 50-50 on Shalanda. Now, the reason it's a little bit higher right now it's in the high 50s. It actually got up into the mid 60s a few days ago, is because Politico reported what I think should have been self-evident. It quoted a number of White House officials basically saying that Shalanda was in all likelihood going to just remain at the post. So my recommendation here would be maybe give it the remainder of the day today. But I think getting Young in the mid or ideally low 50s is a bargain. I think you'll have to wait a couple months to really get your money back here. And there is a risk here that time will just go by. maybe they'll decide that to move Shalonda Young in an even more senior position or something like that. Maybe there will be some controversy with her. This is not by any means a sure thing. I just think the markets right from the outset have been far too bearish on Shalonda Young and are not accounting for just the headache that would be required of moving her out of the position, getting someone new in there. I think just momentum alone is probably going to keep her in the position and makes her the strong front runner to be confirmed OMB director.
So if this were not to work out, though, would you think it'd be more likely that Republicans find something that would stick, that they would have reason to not confirm her or force Biden to nominate someone else, or is it more likely to be that the clock simply runs out? I think if this one gets to year end, it expires as none of the above. Basically, I mean, per whatever the Vacancies Act or whatever is in play here, can she just stay on as acting indefinitely, or does she become ineligible at some point to then take the job full time?
Well, I mean, to your first point on Republican opposition, that's part of the reason why I'm so bullish on her and have been for a long time. Yes, she did have somewhat of a contentious hearing. There were tough questions that she got. But a number of high-profile Republicans right from the beginning have made it abundantly clear that they like working with her, they know her, they trust her. So I don't anticipate Republican opposition being a problem unless you end up seeing some kind of a scandal, which we're not foreseeing right now. I think you're right. I think there is some risk here on timing. Well, it might be worth getting someone on the show who is more attuned with Senate calendar issues than I am. But from what I've gathered from my research, I think very likely the summer is just going to pass and she'll remain in an acting capacity. So, I think markets may get kind of jittery about that, and maybe you can get in at a lower price. But my guess, and we can talk to someone who knows more about this, but my guess would be that she probably ends up getting nominated formally sometime in the fall.
Mm-hmm. And at that point, you're not going to be able to get in at these prices. So Pratik likes this one in the low 50s. Unfortunately, for those of you that don't have super fast fingers, it's actually now moved up, as Pratik's been talking, up to, I think, 59 last I saw it. But watch this one, see if it comes back a bit, and try and get in there if you like Pratik's analysis. And again, the two others that at least I'm keeping close eye on right now, just because they're interesting, they're new, and they're about to expire. It's the House yays for January 6th Commission by 521. Again, I like the upper bracket or betting against some of the lower ones, except for the very bottom bracket, which could be a trap if it doesn't get voted on in time. And the other, again, is sort of a rehash from yesterday because it's still ongoing. The votes are being cast now, and this is for the Pennsylvania voters approving ballot measure number 2. You can still get in there for 75 cents. Again, watch yesterday's episode or check out our Twitter at Old Bull TV for all the reasons why we think this is such a nice deal. Other than that, we are going to, before we close off, let's just see if we have any questions in the chat. I don't actually see any. Particularly, we must have explained things in either a very dull or very comprehensive way that has not yielded any real-time follow-up questions. But Pratik, thanks again for being with us. Thanks, as always, for your analysis. Thank you, viewers, for watching. Thanks, Zach, for producing. Thanks to the folks at PredictIt for partnering with us on this show. Happy trading, and we'll see you next time.